The early 20th century painter, Paul Klee, famously said, "A line is a point that went for a walk." Usually when people hear this particular quote, they hear it in the context of a drawing class, in an art class. But I like to think about a point as also being a thought. And if we think about a point being a thought that matters, then when we take a point for a walk, perhaps that is when we are truly thinking. Now, I don't know about you, but generally when I have a thought, when I have a point, I don't just get one. I get a lot of them. And they're very close together, and they're kind of competing with each other, and they all want to go in a different direction. Now, somehow they go somewhere anyway, and I think that that's rather amazing. And I wanted to make something that kind of communicated a little bit about that kind of thinking, the thinking that I associate with myself. And I think the best way I could do it was through programming. So I started learning a programming language called processing. And with processing, I made this. Now, we have a line here, and we see the line is proceeding in all sorts of different directions, but over time it makes a form. And as it makes a form, it also represents a system. And behind it is a system. And so as I learned programming, I became so enamored with it that I also wanted to teach my students programming, because I see systems all around us. I think our world is full of systems. And to develop a contemporary understanding of systems, I think learning how to program might help. Paul Klee also said that genius is the glitch in the system. Another hero of mine, the 18th and 19th century poet William Blake. In his poem Jerusalem, he says, "I must make a system or be enslaved by some other man's. I will not reason or compare. My business is to create." It's a sort of little diamond of thought. Got a lot of little thoughts in there. And just for a minute, just for a moment, I'd like to look at the facets of this diamond. So you start with this notion of creating a system. Now, Blake was writing at in the age of industrialism, just the start of it. So he was seeing these systems around him. And I think this point is ever more relevant today. But he saw that people weren't simply masters of these systems. Sometimes they were these systems' slaves. He also says, "I will not reason or compare." Now, I love this thing about reason, because I think it says something about artists and creative thinkers in general. And that is, we are unreasonable. Sometimes we're unreasoning, but we are often unreasonable. Why? Because our business is to create, not just to make, not just to copy, not just to put out another image that you've already seen before, but to come up with something new. And I think that this is a really, truly amazing thing. About 3 years ago, I came here to Walla Walla to teach at Whitman College, a liberal arts college. And when I got here, I really didn't know what the liberal arts were really about. Strangely enough, when I was a student, I had gone to liberal arts college, but maybe like a lot of students, I wasn't paying attention. And so I looked it up. I said, what is this liberal arts? And when I looked up the origin of the term, the liberal arts originally was this notion that a certain kind of education separated the free citizen from the slave. Now, I think this is, again, really tied to the thoughts of someone like William Blake. And I think one of the reasons that the liberal arts can keep us free is that they expose us to all these different ideas. They come at us from so many different directions. And we start seeing the connections in them, and we start learning to deal with them. We start learning to deal with them as systems that don't have to enslave us. And that's one reason why I'm very happy to be teaching at a liberal arts college. When I first started teaching, I remember being exposed to a certain idea about learning that was kind of new to me. I was told by a friend that when we're teaching, we aren't simply trying to communicate some set content. Every time that we're teaching, we're also trying to teach a learner how to learn. Now, this took a while to sink in, but when it did, it kind of blew my mind. But more recently, I was reading a book by Kathy Davidson at Duke. The book is called Now You See It. And Kathy suggests that in today's rapidly changing world, we don't simply have to learn how to learn. In many cases, we have to unlearn and relearn. I come across this all the time because I teach a class called New Genres. I'm supposed to teach the new all the time, and it's a struggle to keep up with the new. And as I'm struggling to keep up with the new, as probably everyone in my field is, I realize that this is very important. If all we do is learn, we may be enslaved to an old system that doesn't work anymore. So it's important to unlearn before we learn again. When I was younger, I remember being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, when I was in public school, we didn't have quite as many multiple choice standardized tests as we do now, but I remember having them. And I remember thinking, well, if this is preparing me for whatever jobs you're offering, I don't want it. And so I felt a little lost. But one of the really great things that happened to me when I was in liberal arts school was I had to take an art history class. And I remember a lecture that my art history teacher gave, and she talked about this really crazy guy named Chris Burden. Chris Burden is a performance artist, and he is most noted for a piece that he did in the early 70s called Shoot. And if you've ever seen documentation of this piece, his friend shot him in the arm, basically point blank. I was like, what is up with this? How is this art? Now, I was questioning, but I was also curious. So I looked it up. And I looked up an interview with him. And Chris said something that I really liked. Chris said, art is a free spot in society where you can do anything. Well, anything that society will let you. And something clicked. I said, well, I think I want to study art. I like drawing, But even more than I like drawing, even more than I like images, I like freedom. I like this space. So eventually I made my way not simply into more liberal arts, but I eventually went to an art school. And while I was at art school, I remember being prepared for all this freedom, where I thought I was prepared. And then I got there, and I was surprised. I was surprised because of how hands-off a lot of my teachers were. I remember one of my first teachers saying, well, we're going to be meeting again in a couple of weeks. I'll stop by your studio every once in a while to talk about what you're doing. What do I need to do? He said, well, make something great. And I was like, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, that's the question. And it was. And I came to realize over time, after these personal studio visits with my professors, and after very intensive critiques with these same professors, that they really did care very deeply about what I was doing, and that maybe they were hands-off for a reason. Maybe if they were more hands-on, I'd be doing what they were doing. But with their absence, I had to fill the space with my own thing. I had to not simply make, I had to create. And eventually, I learned that this was really exciting. Over time, I saw so many interesting things come out of art school. It wasn't simply a performance of someone getting shot in the arm that made me question what art might be. I started seeing art that looked to me like it might be political activism. I started seeing art that looked like it could be making a pop band, or art that looked like business. But it was always someone that was doing something a little bit unreasonable, doing things their own way, exploring their freedom. And I really am happy that I'm in a network of people like that. Only a couple of weeks ago, I made a new friend, Jesse. And Jesse is an artist. And Jesse, when he found out that I was doing a TED Talk, he had a really odd suggestion. Jesse likes to think about the connection between the mind and the body. And Jesse likes to work out. So Jesse said that after he sees my TED Talk, he'd like to turn it into an exercise routine. Now, I don't know how he's going to do it. I think it's kind of an unreasonable thing to do. But, Jesse, good luck. And for any of the rest of you that want to try it. Now, the great thing when you take your point, when you take your thinking out for a walk and you're not always sure where it's going to go, you might make some missteps. And you might sometimes get lost. But I think that really that's okay. As unreasonable people, as artists, it's okay to get a little bit lost. And this is connected also to the difference in schooling that I had versus what I often see when I look at standardized testing and the sort of learning regimes that have come out of that. It's not only okay to make a mistake. If you never make a mistake, how much thinking are you doing? You might hold some thoughts in your head for a little while, but are those thoughts really yours? Here's the thing. I think that thinking is not simply a static product that can be measured and compared as they do with standardized learning. I think it's also a dynamic, ever-changing process, something that should be cultivated. And, you know, perhaps all of my thoughts have gotten a little bit lost as I've been talking to you tonight. Perhaps they've been leaping all over each other, and I'm not sure how much made its way through. But I hope that some of these connections and some of these thoughts might continue to take a walk with you. Thank you.